Good evening, everyone. 33 years in 31 days, day 14. Welcome along, those of you that are in here. I've seen a few comments dropping in. Mercedes and Andrea, welcome. Good evening to you. So here we are yet again. This is really odd for me doing a live broadcast because I'm in a position where I'm pretty much doing a live broadcast at the same time every night. And that would have, with work generally, that would have been impossible because I'd be at work doing something. So that my time's often used to jump all over the place. As I'm on holiday and not going back, I can do them all at the same time, which is rather unusual. But good evening, welcome along. Day 14, looking at 2003. If you noticed my tweet on Twitter just a few moments ago that I was going live and said that I'd be looking at 2003, which was quite possibly the worst year of my policing career. I think, oh, really? That sounds depressing. But here we go. Let's jump in with both feet. Those of you that have been watching these right from the very start will remember right back in 1991, where I was out on foot patrol with my tutor constable, and the van pulled up and they were having a chat, and they pointed out that there were, he said, these are two people who you need to know and who you need to remember because they'll always help you out. They're a good bunch of, they're a good pair of lads, da-di-da-di-da, so on, so on, so on. Zuni and Oki. You'll also know that we got right through to, let's have a look, 1997, where we mentioned Oki again, because he is on the traffic unit and has been for a number of years, but is tutoring somebody else that's new to the unit while I'm being tutored by somebody else. And I'm at the scene of my first fatal, and he was mentioned there as well. Okay, so featured throughout my career, he was always there or thereabouts or nearby, and a very much liked and highly regarded officer. And so we get to 2002. Commonwealth Games were taking place in 2002 in Manchester. There was a huge thing. If I'd remembered, I've actually still got the pass with all my photograph and everything for the Commonwealth Games upstairs, which I kept from the event, and all the badges, the pin badges that we got from the teams. But prior to the Commonwealth Games kicking off, there was an awful lot of work that went on, obviously with the security of the venues and the sites. We weren't, traffic weren't particularly involved. But Steve Oak, who we shall put on the screen. Steve Oak, there he is, PC Oak, Oki, had gone on to work for Special Branch. And I'd seen him a couple of times since he'd gone to Special Branch and left traffic, but not all the time. But there was an occasion, and there I was, driving through Wythenshawe, minding my own business, and stood at the side of the road is Steve Oak. So I pulled up. And he looks at my traffic car and he's like, blimey, you're out in the new car, looking after you well, blah, 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 blah. I had a lovely chat with him, asked him what he was doing, and he'd been doing some security work and checks with regard to the location in Wythenshawe where the boxing for the Commonwealth Games was being was going to be taking place. And he'd been doing some work for Special Branch with regard to that. But bumped into him, lovely guy, great big beaming smile, always got something good to say, smashing bloke. We parted and went our separate ways. Oddly, as time has gone on, I've always thought that was just a couple of weeks before what had happened, and then things went wrong. But it turns out it wasn't. It was probably 6 months or so, if not more. Anyway. Lovely guy, very much liked. Didn't work on my block in the traffic unit when he was there. Worked on one of the other teams, but within the same Nicker Platt Lane, and massively loved guy. So we get to 2003, and Steve was working for Special Branch, and he, without going into great lengths of detail, Steve went to a job where they were trying to detain somebody. And a situation developed in that job where circumstances changed significantly. I cannot remember the name of the person involved. I know it just at the minute, it's at the top of my head at the minute, because while I've been reading up on stuff and just checking some information, the name was there. But the circumstances, but his name really isn't important. The only name that's important to me is Steve Oaken. He was the guy that was there. But Steve was there. He got eyes on two people who'd been detained, but the circumstances had changed quite significantly. And a suspect on the scene that was potentially linked to the ricin plots in London was there and hadn't been expected to be there, and so things changed. And the terrorism investigation work is immensely complex and massively complicated with regard to sterile areas, sterile forms of transport. When I worked in custody, if you got a terrorist prisoner, it's immense. You have to line the cells with paper so that anything that drops off them goes onto the paper, and it's immense. Fortunately, we never had to do it, and there's a specialist place that deals with most of that stuff. But it slows things down rapidly, and things were slowed down. And then things just took a turn. They went wrong, and to cut to a very long story short and to a very abrupt finish, Steve was stabbed in the chest 8 times, one of which perforated his heart and killed him. And we were on duty. This was all happening in North Manchester, in the Crumpsall area. So not an area that we covered, but we could hear the traffic on the radio, could hear what was happening, could hear the messages on the radio of what was going on. And I remember distinctly that the sergeant came charging down the corridor and into the parade room and turned the radio up and went, "It's okay." And there was a sort of not being able to process what he'd actually said. He knew that something was happening. He knew there was a job going on. We weren't being called upon to go to it or do anything with it. But then he was like, "It's Oki." And you think, what? Oki's involved. Oki's dealing with it. Oki's, you know, always in the thick of it. Oki, great lad. He's in there. And I said anything. And they said, it's proved. And that's a phrase that we use in the police all the time. Have they proved? And that means, have they proved? Have they died? Life is extinct. Have they proved? Life is extinct. So it's an odd terminology that the police use, but it's something that we do use. And Steve was killed. He was murdered, and it was an awful, awful day. I will only say that to finish that really is that it's the only day in 30 years policing, where I've come home after a tour of duty, sat on the sofa and cried. It really was an awful, awful day. Smashing family man, children, beautiful wife. If those of you can remember the time, his father, Robin, who was the former chief constable of the Isle of Man Constabulary, publicly forgave the murderer of his son on television within 24 hours of the event happening. A remarkable, remarkable man who I had the privilege of meeting a couple of years ago. at an event hosted by a friend of mine over on the Wirral. He is a remarkable man, and it was a privilege to meet him, shake his hand, and say that I was a police officer and that I'd worked with Steve over a number of years. Lovely guy. To cut a very long story short, and I could go on about this forever and ever and ever, and he was much closer to there were other people on the unit who were much closer to him than I ever was, but it doesn't stop affecting you. And it's one of those things that still hangs there in your memories all the time. And I put the final photograph up here, is that when it came to his funeral, I don't know what's happened to that picture. Why is that picture not working? Hang on. It's definitely there. Can we get it? There. That's the side entrance to Manchester Cathedral. And the traffic unit formed the guard of honour at the door. There are a couple of cops from another department that just stood right close to the door, but the rest are all white hats, and that's all the traffic unit from Platt Lane. And we turned out and did the guard of honour for him at the door when he was brought in. There was a massive public outcry and support and what have you that went on as a result of that. Steve's funeral was enormous. All the politicians and everybody all turned. Tony Blair was there. It was a huge carnival, I think, for them. They sort of turn up because they feel that they should. But it was an incredible service. It was a privilege to be there. We were actually in the cathedral listening to the service and some of the people speaking and singing. It was just remarkable. But here's an odd thing, just how things happen to be a coincidence, because I decided to do 31 Days Live through January as a sort of homage to the 31 Days Live that I'd previously done, I suppose, and would cover 33 years of policing. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'll do the first 3 in a tight nut, and then I'll do 1 year, one broadcast for 1 year, all the way through for the following 30 days and cover. So it just so happens, without any planning or without any thought of it, that January the 14th happens to be the year that I do 2003, the year that Steve was killed. Steve was killed on January the 14th, 2003. So it was this day, which is really quite odd to find myself talking about this on the day that he was killed in 2003. Sad times. But a lovely guy, amazing guy, an amazing family. Moving on from that, 2003 didn't start well then, really. 14th of January, it all just went pear-shaped, to be honest. And so later that year, here's the next thing that really made it quite a horrible year for me. Went to a collision in the sort of Longsight area of Manchester. Section lads were there dealing with it and sorting things out. They just wanted some advice and some backup. So I said I'd go, and I got myself around there and got to the scene, spoke to them, and they got a chap in the back of an ambulance. And I said, well, have you breathalyzed him? And they said, no. I said, well, if you don't breathalyze him now, it's going to get really complicated later. I said, get in the back of the ambulance and get him bagged. So Bobby jumps out and he gets his breathalyzer and gets into the ambulance, and the ambulance said, yeah, carry on, nice of it. And he breathalyzed him and he was positive. So then they look at me again then and say, what do we do now? So I said, well, he's a patient and he's decided he's going to hospital. I said, so you've got to follow the hospital procedure for drink drivers, which again is complicated. It's easy when you know what you're doing, but it's complicated and intimidating if you don't. So I told them what they needed to do, And they said, oh, well, we're not really sure and all this. I said, well, first of all, I said, stick with him, get to hospital. I'll go and get the kit. I said, and then I'll bring it to you and explain what's needed. So I left them with it and I disappeared, and I went to the police station and got the kit, went back to the hospital, walked into the hospital and said, there's a drink driver patient come in, should be with a couple of cops. Don't know what you're talking about. I don't think there's any cops here at all. Really? Well, they should be here with it. He came in, So I shouted up to see if he'd been arrested and taken to the Nick, and they said, no, we're not even with him. So I'm like, well, why aren't you with him? You're supposed to be at hospital with him. Turns out the Bobbies didn't follow and go with this person to hospital. And therefore, when he landed at hospital, he got off the ambulance and cleared off. Likely because he knew he was over the limit. This story goes on and on and on, but ultimately it leads to a whole load of inquiries about 15 miles away off division, trying to locate this person. And the section Bobbies can't go and do that, it's too far. So I just take it on myself. So I drive over way deep into Salford, find an address, knock on the door, find this fella, say, yeah, you're locked up. He got locked up and brought in. Now, I was on the Salford division, so I was out of my area, out of where I normally work. So I shouted up on their channel and said, I've got a prisoner for drink drive. It's complicated, but I'm at this address. Can you send me a van? They sent me a van and they took the prisoner to the Crescent police station. If anybody knows Salford, they'll know the Crescent police station very well. Long since gone again, unfortunately, but quite an iconic police station, the Crescent. Turn up there, and an incident whilst I was in custody dealing with this person, an incident occurred with another prisoner that left me where I hadn't seen exactly what had happened, but I'd heard things that sounded very much like somebody had just been given a slap. But I hadn't seen anything, so I didn't know what to do. But what I did know what I wanted to do was I wanted to get out of that building as quickly as possible and get away from the place. So I got a few things sorted out, processed this prisoner really quickly, gone. My block had gone home. I was late off, got back to the police station at Platt Lane, booked my car in, got myself straight, no supervision on duty, so nobody that I can speak to. So I went home, straight into arrest day. Went straight into arrest day and 2 rest days. Following rest day was arrest day, and the following day was arrest day as well. I spent 2 days agonizing with myself about what I had heard, what I had or had not seen, what I thought had happened, what I knew had happened, what I didn't know had happened. What would people think of me? Would I be, am I dragging colleagues into something that they don't deserve, or am I standing up my ground morally and doing the right thing, or all sorts of things. Didn't sleep, awful, absolutely awful. Went to work on earlies on, say, the Wednesday, say it was the Sunday. I had the Monday and Tuesday off. I went in on the Wednesday, went into work on the Wednesday, felt sick, didn't know what to do about it, didn't know who to speak to about it, but there was a whistleblower's line. I went upstairs and I picked up the phone and listened to the recorded message and then put it down. Still not sure, still not knowing whether I'm doing the right thing, whether I'm doing the wrong thing, what am I doing? Following day, Thursday, still no sleep, still worried sick about it and feeling ill. Went upstairs, picked up the phone, left the message. I think something happened in the custody suite at this time, on this night, da-da-da-da-da. To cut a very, very long story short, eventually I had somebody from complaints and discipline getting in touch with me. My fear was, if I do something, if I say something, well then I might be blackballed by all my colleagues, which was a thing. Or if I didn't do something, I might lose the respect of all my friends and family who believe me to be honest, upright, upstanding, morally courageous, and all those things. And that's why I spoke out, because I felt I had to speak out. Whether something happened with it or not was irrelevant. I had to speak out, because what I didn't want was the phone call that said, you got an appointment to come and see Professional Standards, come and be interviewed about a matter that happened in present custody, and I'll say, why didn't you speak to us in the first place? So I rang the whistleblowers, reported it. Professional Standards eventually got in touch with me. They were dancing around me because whistleblowers was quite new and they really didn't know what they were doing with it. So they were tiptoeing very gingerly around me, trying to sort of talk to me very carefully without sort of disclosing that they'd pretty much figured out that it was me who'd left the message. And eventually I said, look, are you going to stop tiptoeing around me and dance me? I said, you know damn well that it's me that left the anonymous whistleblower's message. And he said, well, what makes you say that? And I said, because you know it and I know it. And and I said, you know what? I said, I'll give you a statement. I said, if you want a statement, come and get the statement. I said, because if I've got the conviction to pick up the phone and make the phone call, I said, well, then I should have the conviction to stand up in front of these people and tell them what I thought and what I saw and what I witnessed. I said, otherwise, I'm just, I said, I might as well. I should put myself into that position, Otherwise, I don't know. I should have the balls basically to stand up in front of these people and tell them what I experienced. So that's what happened. It ended up at a discipline hearing for the sergeant and the PC at headquarters at Boyer Street in Greater Manchester, in front of the assistant chief constable. I think it was ACC Green at the time, and the in between all that, the Professional Standards Department decided that they wanted to also have a bite of me, because they said I hadn't reported it quick enough. So they said, I said there was no supervision on, and then I went into 2 rest days. I struggled with it on the Wednesday, and on the Thursday I rang it through. Well, they said there'd be supervision on somewhere, even if it was on another division. There's somebody that you could speak to and you could have done something about it, but you didn't, and they wanted to leg me for it. And I was interviewed for it. And those of you that remember that I spoke about Trevor and Trevor's dog, Trevor was the Federation operative. Trevor came and sat with me on the interview. And at the very end of the interview, they said, have you got anything else you want to tell us or say about these circumstances and what's gone on? And I said, yeah, don't shoot the messenger. And I left it at that. Cut back to ACC Green, headquarters, discipline hearing. Sergeant was acquitted. The officer got some sanctions levelled against him and fines and things that they found proved. In the only time in my career where I've had a commendation, oddly, giving evidence against other officers. But I was commended by ACC Green for the quality of my evidence and the strength of character in both reporting it, but then standing up to my own convictions and coming in and actually being part of that process. So that was all done and dusted. And I then got a memo from the Discipline and Complaints people, the Y department, as they used to be called. People tend to refer to them as PSD. In GMP at the time, they were called the Y department, because every department had a letter. You were a divisional letter, and then other departments had letters. So the major crime was V, traffic and roads policing and tactical aid and force-wide resource stuff were the X department. And the X department was actually where I worked at the time, because we'd moved to the X, traffic had moved to the X. So lots of stuff going on there, and all that stuff was horrible. But then I get the memo from Professional Standards saying that they're withdrawing the allegation that they'd made against me for not reporting it quick enough, because they'd clearly had a review of the circumstances and a review of how I'd reported it and a review of their policy with regard to whistleblowing and how all that works. Because like I said, it was all very brand new. And they expunged anything from my record with regard to that and said, forget it, it's gone. I think I've still got that memo upstairs somewhere as well. But that was a really traumatic process, right from the moment that something occurred, right through to making the anonymous whistleblower's phone call, to standing up at a discipline hearing and giving evidence against other officers. Not pleasant. But I said to people that I wasn't going to jeopardize my career, I wasn't going to jeopardize my pension, and I wasn't going to jeopardize the respect and trust of my family and friends for the sake of somebody who can't control themselves. I'm not going to jeopardize all that because you can't behave yourself. And that was the philosophy that I put into it. So 2003 wasn't a good year. That was a horrible experience. Certainly not something that I'd wish anybody to go through, but it certainly made me a better officer as a result of it. But primarily and oddly, that we lost Steve Oake on the 14th of January 2003, and today, ironically, without any planning or thought into it, is the 14th of January 2003. I think we'll leave it at that. Smashing bloke. Missed by many. And even today on Facebook, a lot of the people that worked with him, and in particular, if you think about 1997, where I'm dealing with my first fatal, and Oakey is showing the lad that he's tutoring, John, into the back of the ambulance to see my casualty, because you've got to face these things and you've got to see the circumstances that people die in and the rest of it, because that's what you're going to be dealing with. John, posted today on Facebook that it's been such a long time, but still missed every day. And so many others have done the same. So it's a sad time. But moving on to tomorrow, day 15, 2004. Let's see what that holds. So a bit gloomy tonight, for which I apologise, but that's what policing is about. Policing is sometimes cut, thrust, and laughing until your tears are rolling down your cheek, and it can also be incredibly sad and stressful and hard. But there we go. Long one today, because I've gone on, and I could go on and on and on and on and on about Steve. But that's all. Thank you for dropping in, replay viewers. Thank you for watching if you've stuck with us this far. I will see you tomorrow on 33 years in 31 days, day 15, looking at 2004. Take care. Good night.